but now that we have a lot of attendees joining us from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and the UK. So really excited to see that so many had the opportunity to join us today in exploring how we all can work with employee engagement inside our organizations. And of course, in this day and age, as we just touched upon, I think we all experienced firsthand how important it is to really listen and follow up our employees. And during the course of the pandemic, it's become clear for everyone what a substantial role HR specifically plays in creating value in our organizations. My name is Atle Knudsen, and I work as the Product Development Director at Visma Talent Solutions. And I've had the pleasure of creating HR software for the last 8 years in Visma. Right now, I'm situated in my home office in beautiful Oslo, of course, eagerly awaiting for the offices to be opened back up again. Today, I will guide you all through the topic at hand by interviewing the co-founder of Qlearsite, and we will have an open talk where questions along the side, of course, is strongly encouraged. And I promise you today a slide-free webinar, but at the end with a live demo. So first, why did Visma partner up with Qlearsite? During 2020, it was clear to us in Visma and for many of our customers that knowing how our employees feels, thinks, and operate got a lot harder when we actually couldn't meet face-to-face anymore. It was also something that got the attention from management groups, board of directors, and the steering committee. How do we follow up our employees? So we therefore set about to scout for the best possible platform within this field, thinking that clearly someone has tried to make a dent in the universe of employee engagement. After extensive research and testing, we did find such a best-of-breed partner in Qlearsite. With a Swedish CEO, Norwegian owners, and a dedicated London-based team, they were set for success even before we started to talk with them. Now, Visma Engage, which is entirely built on the Qlearsite platform, is part of the Visma Talent Solutions portfolio. And Visma Talent Solutions is the key strategic HR partner and people technology vendor for all organizations in the Nordics. And we're lucky today to have a true visionary within the field of employee engagement who will talk to us about this today. The co-founder and chief product officer in Qlearsite, Peter Clark.
Thanks so much, Edlo, for that intro. That's very warm words. I hope I live up to that billing.
I'm sure you do. And in this webinar today, we will explore what employee engagement is and how you can work actively with engagement in your organizations. We will also show how Visma Engage, powered by Qlearsite, will really enable this work to take place. But before that, just some basic housekeeping, and maybe Ope, you could share some of the housekeeping rules today.
Absolutely. Everybody, hi, my name is Ope. I head up partnerships at Qlearsite, so I'm really excited about this webinar. Today, I think you're all probably on mute. If you're not, please keep yourselves on mute. However, we'd like to engage with you throughout this session. So there is a chat box on the right-hand side. So you can definitely write questions, write comments, and we'll make sure that we address some of those in this webinar. And again, let's just be as engaging as possible. To kick off, what we would like you to do is, if you have one pressing question around employee engagement, so there's something that you're challenged with within the organization that you'd like support in, if you could just type it in the message, I'll make sure that as we go through today's webinar, I will also address that question, or at least give Pete the opportunity to address that question for you. So welcome, and I guess we can kick off.
Indeed we can, Ope. Thank you very much. And to just get us started, of course, it's hard to kind of go about this topic without touching on the effects of the current pandemic as well, which of course is a great impact in terms of what we do here. And Peter, you and your colleagues in Qlearsite has been talking about the great acceleration taking place throughout the Western societies, where we have digital revolution, the climate change, and the future of work, all trends that we all are forced to be dealing with one way or another. And then March 2020 happened and the global lockdown began. Where are we now?
I think those trends are getting faster. So, I mean, the words you use there, great acceleration, is exactly right. It feels very much like what was about to happen is happening faster, because in this moment of flex, where we've been affected by the pandemic, digitization, for example, a mega trend that has been ongoing for a long time now, has suddenly accelerated. I think I mentioned just before the session started, we used to do a breakfast event where people would come in person. Now we're doing it digitally. We're forced to collaborate digitally to find new ways to communicate with one another. Hybrid working is a thing which I don't think is going to go away, and that is a trend that we've been seeing emerge in workplaces. Disaggregation of work. We've seen that jobs are starting to be put into small tasks, into a gig economy within certain industries and sectors. That, if anything, in a digitally enabled economy, is starting to accelerate, and those tasks that may have been done in a traditional workplace could now be done anywhere in the world remotely. And I think that's what really has happened, that we've seen an acceleration of those trends, such that we couldn't necessarily have understood how much change has been forced on us and how we've responded to that change by leaning into what was potentially already the future that was about to arrive. And of course, one of those trends is the power and purpose of organizations as expressed by their employees. During the pandemic, we've seen huge movements around what people feel are the most important topics, both at work and societally, like Black Lives Matter, for example. And responding to those voices is a hallmark of how we rate our leadership today. And you can see that in the pandemic responses, and you can also see that in the responses of individual companies who've been navigating these huge changes, and the role of leadership and how they've communicated and listened to their employees who've been through these enormous changes in such a short period of time, which of course causes stress. So I think what we are observing is a future which was already awaiting us arriving in a hurry. And I think the hallmark of the way in which you navigate such a great period of change quickly is how you listen and respond as a leadership team, as an HR team, as an organization at all levels to one another.
Good point. And maybe we should also kind of bring everyone on the same page here and dive into the topic itself, employee engagement. Maybe you could explain to me what that really means and what's really different between employee engagement and employee happiness.
Yeah, they're often talked about together, but they're quite separate concepts. So engagement really means that you're emotionally committed about work, that you care about the job that you do, and quite often the organization that you serve. Happiness can exist without necessarily being engaged. I once had a customer who gave out ice cream on a Friday to all of their employees. I can tell you in that moment, almost everybody was happy. They were enjoying their ice cream, but very few of them actually were committed or engaged to their work. And that can, at the extremes of the concept of engagement, manifest itself quite clearly. So people can be over-engaged. You can care too much about work, which can sometimes result in burnout and stress and situations which are not happy. So they're different. You could be completely happy at work because your job is one that allows you to do lots of things else in your life because there's no commitment and you're not working hard, and that means that you're totally unengaged. You can be totally engaged and feeling quite stressed because you care too much about work and then not happy. So they're separate concepts, but engagement in particular is the one that organizations focus on mostly because that is the thing that we can influence most. There are so many factors that go into whether someone is happy, especially things that are outside of work, that are hard for us to measure and influence. Whereas this emotional connection to work is what we as HR professionals and as what we used to call ourselves organizational scientists can influence most, and how we can then help shape better working environments to encourage people to care about their work, which, by the way, is a driver ultimately of happiness. So people do want to do a good job. That is innate. That is part of an ancient Greek philosophy, Stoicism, but it's also something we can scientifically measure today. So our responsibility is to improve the engagement of our people at work. but we cannot obviously take responsibility for all aspects of someone's happiness.
No, of course, that would be a harder mandate to take on one's shoulder, of course. But kind of, and I'll try to ask the stupid questions today, so kind of all understand this and follow along. So what are the real benefits then of having highly engaged employees, and why should we really care about this?
Yeah, I think we should all care about it enormously. There are benefits at all levels. So for an organization itself, engaged employees, because they are showing that emotional connection, because they care about work, they are more likely to therefore invest their efforts into doing a good job. And in a world such as the one we're experiencing today, I'm using a computer which you could buy anywhere. I have no special advantage. I've bought all of this kit from stores. So the only real difference between our organization and another organization is the creativity, the innovation of our people, their willingness to collaborate and work together in order to achieve the goals of our organization. And that's really what engagement gives you. In a world where I hear so often people say, our people are our most important asset, or how do we compete? It's all around our talent model. Well, if those things are true, and I think they really are true in a world which is more services orientated or which relies on creativity and innovation, which we are increasingly seeing, especially in most developed economies, then you must have a tool to harness the power of your people so that you can then have those people powering your growth, your profit, and the business KPIs, but also that they're empowering each other to have fulfilling work lives. One of the biggest drivers of engagement is, do I have the right tools to do my job? There is nothing so frustrating as not having the tool to get your job done. I think, to go back to your first question, Adelaide, happiness cannot exist unless we feel some level of purpose and fulfillment at work. It doesn't mean that engagement and happiness are the same thing, but I certainly think that having good engagement and a fulfilled work life is a core driver of happiness. So for us, it's really a upward spiral of positivity. If I'm engaged at work, I contribute more, my company is more successful, I feel more fulfilled because I'm part of a winning team, I continue to feel engaged, and there's a happy symbiotic relationship between improving engagement, delivering great business outcomes, which leadership teams of organizations care about, but also creating a fulfilling working environment for people to enjoy contributing their best every day, which is a key driver of ultimately their happiness too.
You talk about this positive spiral where kind of happiness and engagement just keeps piggybacking on each other. But what would be then the other side of the coin? What would happen if you had disengaged employees? What's the kind of outcome of that?
So, I mean, it is a spiral which goes both directions sometimes. I think most people are kind of in the middle. They've got a decent level of engagement, but it's not necessarily hyper engaged or too low. And you'll see in any organization a spread of engagement. So some people are quite disaffected and some people are very positive. So what is the downward spiral? Well, essentially people switch off from work. They no longer care about their work, so they contribute less. Problems that could have been quite small and proactively managed by an engaged workforce become bigger. The company or the organization, it's not necessarily always a business, will start to feel more and more dysfunctional. And instead of this positive reinforcing upwards momentum, it can quickly have the opposite effect. And there are lots of things that we can do about that. It's not that once you have the momentum, you always go up, or if you're starting to spiral, you always go down. This is, of course, a way to prevent the spiral is to start to measure engagement, start to take an active interest in it. But ultimately, if you don't do things which help people feel fulfilled at work, to feel that they care about it, you will see them start to become dysfunctional, productivity will dip. They will start to have a negative impact on the colleagues around them. One of the key drivers of engagement of a team is how engaged the manager is. Then ultimately, if you do nothing about it, people become frustrated and they will leave the organization. So a key leading indicator of attrition is engagement itself. And then you will see the company performance start to impact. But it shouldn't go that far. There's many things we can do before it goes all the way down into this opposite of the positive effect that we are looking for, the negative spiral.
Of course, kind of talking about business kind of reasons in terms of happiness and engagement all sounds great, but kind of how is this connected to the actual business outcome? Why should the business care about this?
Yeah, I think that's been missing from a lot of engagement approaches for a long time. I think if I think about, I mean, it sounds very harsh, but if I look at an analysis of the 100 largest companies in the UK, for example, or actually this is true in many economies, very few of the leaders of those organisations have come from an HR background. It's far more likely, hardly any, in fact, only one or two. It's far more likely they come from a finance background or an operations background. So it is difficult for them to take an interest in engagement other than from a compliance point of view. What they're really looking for is, as long as we're not doing that negative spiral where things are getting really bad, they almost don't take an interest in a lot of organizations. I'm happy to say there are many other organizations which don't. But I think that's a really critical mistake. We touched on the fact that in a services and knowledge-based economy, that people are the key differentiator and the source of competitive advantage. And that's not a belief. It's not a statement of faith. It's a statement of fact, because we've got so much evidence that shows that engaged employees deliver higher levels of productivity, are more creative. And what is the overall impact? The simplest thing that I think is most intuitive is that you see better customer service. You can go into any store in the future, perhaps, when we're more permitted to go into physical shops. But you can see the difference between being served by someone who is engaged, who cares about the company they work for, who goes the extra mile maybe to help you find the product you're looking for, versus someone who does not care. Now, ultimately, you're more likely to buy from the person who is engaged than the person who is not. And that drives profit and growth and really critical business outcomes. That's just in a retail environment, but it's true in almost all environments. If a leader, let's say from a finance or an operational background, could see the evidence that I've seen and that actually we provide as part of this solution, that a more positive, engaged employee can deliver extraordinary outcomes for the company, which then ultimately makes it more successful and makes it more profitable. Words which really resonates at the board and the senior executive level. I think that's the key to finding the investment budgets you need to tackle some of the underlying issues in employee engagement. And I think they've really seen that recently with the COVID pandemic. In a hybrid working model, those who failed to take action to maintain the engagement of their employees in this moment of stress have seen the impact, a dramatic drop in productivity and some real challenges. And those that did this well and took the initiative to then respond to the needs of their people and maintain that level of engagement have seen much, much better results. So it's important, even at a board level, even if you are not an HR professional, this drives the value of your business, the success of it, and that is worthy of investment, and it's worthy of a long conversation about how to improve that at the most senior levels of any organization or business.
Yeah, which of course covers both the public and the private sector here, which both creates a lot of value, just in different terms, and having that engagement sounds to be a really positive driver for both types of organizations.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. I would like to transition a bit over to how we actually measure this, because of course, I guess some organizations have been doing this for years with kind of the annual big survey. We've done this in Visma for many years as well, kind of one annual, biannual employee survey, getting kind of input from the employees, and then some follow-ups and actions in terms of doing that. But during 2020, we also internally experienced that we were kind of running an outdated process. So how would you see this going forward, and how would you say that the best way to measure employee engagement? Are surveys still a relevant method to do that? And if so, how?
Yeah, I mean, surveys have a bad reputation because Mostly they are associated with what you just described, Ale. You know, a big annual survey, 100 questions. It takes a long time to complete. Some of the questions feel quite repetitive. They don't really flow. And so this is, you know, the idea of a survey is kind of a big switch off for most employees because this is their experience of it. But I think that's probably a good tool used very badly. So surveys don't have to be long. We advocate for surveys and we provide as part of our products surveys that are 20 questions or less, at most 25. That's the maximum. So shorter, better surveys, which are more engaging and to the point, ask meaningful questions. Try and structure them in a narrative. So one of the things that's really tragic about a survey is it's just question after question after question. You need to put some more words around it to tell people why you're asking those questions so they understand that their answers are important. And most important of all, to start to make it feel more like a conversation than an interrogation. So shorter, better surveys, meaningful, covered in narrative, and then still to gather what is most important, the feedback of people. Because why do we use the survey? Because it's an excellent scientific method. It's a way to understand what is going on amongst large groups of people, and there is enormous rigor in this approach versus other approaches. But the problem is that a scientific method which is done in an unappealing way without a nice visual, mobile-enabled, dynamic survey which has shorter, better questions can often feel long and tedious. And the other point about a survey, which I think has made the worst impact in terms of its reputation, is that something must happen at the end of it. So it's not the finish line. There must be a communication. People must understand that you've understood and respected the results as a central HR team. You must share the scores and be transparent about what the issues are that it's revealed and the strengths that you should celebrate. And most importantly, the people who've contributed their feedback must feel that there's some kind of change that arrives at the end of the survey, such that they feel that that was a meaningful use of their time. So I acknowledge surveys have a bad reputation, but they're enormously powerful tools if done in a frequency which isn't pestering. It's a narrative, it's shorter, better questions, there's change that's delivered, and it's the start of an honest conversation about what's happening in your organization, as opposed to a submarine which breaches the water, causes a lot of disruption, and disappears without any real trace.
One of the kind of other, you could say, outcomes usually from surveys is you end up with kind of a score or rating, and very often it's hard to tell what that really means. Kind of,
yeah,
what is this, a good score or a bad score? How can you kind of work with that? And is that some way to kind of really help the managers work with this outcome?
So I think that's a really good point. What is a good score? So to an extent, you can make a measure of how good the score is by looking at other companies or other organizations in the public sector which are similar to you in terms of maturity, scale, type of activity. That is a totally legitimate way of understanding and validating the scores you've got. What we would say actually is what's most important for an organization is to look at the best scores and the worst scores that you have internally. Set your own benchmark, set your own standards, and then try to then contextualize those scores by going beyond the score itself and looking at the qualitative feedback. What is absolutely critical is to understand how you can make a change to improve that number. So I can look at some of the best teams in an organization. I can see they've got great scores. That shows me what is possible. It is possible to have 70 or 80% levels of engagement in a team because these groups of people have achieved it, not in any organization, but in your organization. So benchmark yourself. And then what becomes really vital is to start to analyze what is it about the experience of being in that team which allows people to feel connected and engaged, so that we can then learn from that and try and replicate it across other teams. So at that point, a qualitative analysis becomes really key. And that's also what enables us to ask so few questions, because we can ask big, broad questions, A long survey might ask 20 questions about leadership. We could ask just one, and then ask people to describe why they've rated leadership as something that's very positive or potentially very negative. And that second follow-up question, the qualitative question, is full of rich insight. So a few approaches to scores. You could benchmark externally. That's totally legitimate. I would argue that far better is to benchmark internally and then try to understand what was the real differences between the best and worst teams within your organization and create real learnings from that, because that is something which is grounded in the context and the experience of your organization, not an imported best practice that may or may not work.
So just for the sake of the argument, then let's say I'm the team lead for such a great team you described with kind of great engagement scores, and we've had so for the last few quarters, a few years. Why should I keep measuring it? And kind of if I still do that, how often should I do it?
Yeah, so really good question. I mean, I think, we spoke a little bit about spiraling up or spiraling down. There's two reasons why you would want to keep measuring it. Firstly, because it's such a leading indicator. People will start to switch off from work way before they will eventually leave your team. And it's not always obvious, that especially for people who are used to having highly engaged teams, that there's moments where they are starting to disengage. So it is like any good relationship. I ask my wife quite often, how is she? What's going on? Not because I think that she's disengaging from our relationship, but because it's important to have a barometer of where she is, maybe a little bit up, maybe a little bit down, but also to understand what's driving that and small issues that are emerging in the team. So engagement can change. The circumstances of the business can change. You can be faced with new challenges. For example, I could have been a highly engaged manager, a manager of a highly engaged team going into COVID. I could have struggled to manage that sudden shift to a hybrid working model, and my team could quickly become disengaged. I need to be aware of that. Now, you said the frequency. I think what you have to respect is if you ask people too often if they're engaged, it can become annoying, and the very act of that can become disengaging. So we advocate for something which is much more of a strategic approach. So we could have a scan survey that we call it, that covers a range of topics, maybe once or twice a year, a couple of deep dives on some focus topics, checking in with people. So I think it's appropriate to find the pace of your organization and have a survey cadence that fits with that. So 4, maybe 5 times a year. But then when you go through a big change like COVID, it's very important to check in with people to understand that. And we also sometimes advocate for what we call an open door approach, which is to have a survey that's open all year round, that is freely available for anybody to take as they feel the need to. So rather than the survey coming out at a set date, there's a secondary opportunity to give voice to your feedback when you feel that you'd like. So there's lots of strategies to pull this together, but I would say a standard good cadence for organization is 4 or 5 times a year, unless there's a extraordinary event such as the one we've just experienced, at which point I would increase the cadence, because obviously during moments of stress and change, it's a quick moving event. You need a much more frequent measure.
Yeah, good answer. Thank you, Peter. And we've kind of gone through kind of why and how often we should do this, but let's say we have a team struggling, kind of having not such good engagement scores. What action can I actually do to improve both my teams and my organization at large on engagement? And are there certain actions I need to prioritize, I presume, and how do I do that?
Yeah, it's hard to say that there's one set of actions. So I spoke a little bit about the qualitative feedback that we gather. I think that's really key to identifying great actions. So there's probably a few levels of action planning. So let's say I've got a negative score around communication. This is a key driver of engagement. If I don't receive great communication as an employee, I quickly lose touch with the reality of what's going on. I feel left out, perhaps isolated. Okay, so what action can we take about that? Well, there's many best practices out there from other organizations where you can see examples of great communication, maybe great communication from even companies which are quite similar to your own. So we can learn from that. And that is an interesting way to identify actions that you see other people successfully deploying and learning from other organizations. But again, going back to the idea of benchmarking against yourself, I think it is almost never been seen that in one company, everybody says the communication is bad. Somewhere you'll find someone who is doing a great job, and they're doing it in the context of that organization. And what that gives you a chance to do is to ask questions, not just about what should we change within that team, but also what is great about that team, and to learn from that. We had one customer where things were pretty difficult for a lot of teams, but there was one team that was extraordinarily positive about almost all aspects of their working life. And the only thing that they had in common is they all reported to a lady called Jane. So we had a action planning session where we called it, what would Jane do? So we asked Jane, and we looked at the feedback of her team, and we found some amazing ideas that were authentic to the context of their organization about how they would like to communicate. The challenge of importing an idea or a best practice is it cannot seem authentic. So to give you an example on the communication front, if I was to write a thank you email, everybody at Qlearsite would find that very strange because we don't really communicate on email. It's quite formal. We're much more of an informal culture. However, if I was to communicate a success or something that I'm grateful for, like a great team effort, with a short video and then post that onto Slack or our culture app, Totem, I think that's a completely authentic method of communication and something that is a great action for other people also within my company to do. So the idea that there are a set of single universal actions which will improve engagement, this is not the case. There's special recipes for each organization. It's quite often the best ideas come from the organization itself, buried in that qualitative feedback. But even if they don't, we can then still look at other companies, see some best practices, and then pick the ones that feel like they would be most successful here. But if I were to recommend one thing, find your equivalent of Jane, that extraordinary manager who's nailing communication, and ask what would Jane do, and then look at the data and identify if there are some themes in her team's feedback which will enable you to import those amazing best practices into other teams.
And that was a good example with the communication. But you also have other kind of make it more practical here in terms of bringing it from theory to actual experiences. Do you have other customers who've used their survey data to improve their own engagement?
Yeah, it can often be, I can give you two simple examples, one relating to tools and one relating to a much softer cultural aspect. So I said earlier on that if you don't have the right tools for engagement, it can be devastating. The right tools to do your job, it can be devastating for engagement. So one of our customers is a very, very large supermarket chain, 120,000 employees. And what they discovered looking at their feedback is that if you were to work in one of their stores, you might have a device that scans the barcodes to check the prices. All right. But then if you want to check how much stock there is, there's another device and you scan the barcode with that. And they had up to 18 devices for various tasks in the stores. So if you imagine the people walking around the stores, they're carrying so much equipment and they hated it. It made work really unpleasant. And quite often, because there were so many devices, they would go missing or they didn't all have their own device, so they were sharing devices. They were not properly equipped for the work. This really came across very clearly. And they took the decision to then create a single device, the phone that the people already owned, and put an app on it, which was enabled to scan for price checking, stock checking, all of the things that those other devices covered. Massive driver of engagement, huge boost to productivity, the lost time of that, great impacts in terms of results. It was a big investment, but because we were able to show how big the problem was through the feedback of those people, the company was able to take it. So a very practical change that drove millions and millions of pounds benefits. On the other side, I've got a soft example. And by the way, I mean, the tool score was low for this supermarket, but the feedback specific to the number and volume of devices they are creating was so specific to the context of that organization, you could have never found it by importing a best practice. It was unique to what they were doing. So we had to go to the qualitative feedback to find that. A softer version is a services-based organization who really struggles with a very low score in terms of recognition. A hard-working, committed organization who felt underappreciated. And what became clear, again, looking at the qualitative feedback, is the number one way to improve engagement there was actually just for people to congratulate those who are working hard on a job well done. And what we were able to demonstrate is that simply by showing appreciation, daily appreciation, for the work of the people who have made those extra efforts, because it was, again, a very large organization, this would save millions of pounds in attrition. Because ultimately people were very engaged, they cared about their work, they were doing good jobs, but when they felt underappreciated, they ultimately lost that level of engagement and left. So two completely different examples. Both are, I think, enormous drivers of value for those organizations, retaining talent in the second one and getting the job done in the first. Both of them engagement issues. Both of them have a really clear investment case to solve. And both of them improve the working lives of the people in those organizations and delivered extraordinary value. Those are really tangible outcomes. Where do we find those outcomes? In the feedback, by listening to people and using engagement as a strategic tool.
And using engagement as a strategic tool in terms of working with it, you kind of also most likely would need a tool and a platform to do that. And of course, one of the reasons we're here today is we have a partnership where Visma Engage is such a platform based on the Qlearsite from the start. Kind of how could organizations, both public and private, use Visma Engage to measure and improve their engagement? And what would you say is unique about this platform?
Yeah, so I spoke a bit about the methodology that's embedded within Visma Engage, but I'd say that the technology itself is also, I think, got some really interesting aspects to it, which makes it a better solution. So the first thing is that we've invested an enormous amount of time to make it really simple and easy to use. One of the things which is disengaging is if you are presented with a tool which is itself hard to navigate or hard to understand. So a nice, simple interface. We've got surveys which follow the rules that I presented, so shorter, better, more meaningful questions, but also that can be adapted to look and feel authentic to the organization with great branding, lots of follow-ups, great communication around the survey itself. Really clean, simple dashboards to get the results out. But what I think really, really makes us unique is the language analysis. We've spent years researching how to convert qualitative feedback into accurate measures, which are equivalent to scores. So ways to measure employee sentiment just from the words that they use, ways to then identify the most important themes. So if we ask people, what should we change? How do we find the best ideas for what to change? We look at the feedback of the people. And this is what is technically known as natural language processing, which we've spent sort of 4 or 5 years researching the best practices, learning from leaders like Google, for example, of how they process language, and then embed that into the technology to allow it to then truly be a listening platform. So something which we can listen to the words of people. Because again, I spoke about getting feedback in a relationship. When I come home or when I go downstairs at the end of my working day and I meet my wife and she's just had her working day, I don't issue her with a checkbox survey and say, how was your day on a scale of 1 to 5? Are you hungry on a scale of 1 to 5? I say, how's your day? Tell me all about it. And there's a lot of rich contextual information in that. So that's why we've invested so much time in a tool to understand and measure employee sentiment and identify patterns in language which are across many different people. And what we're so proud of is the ability to embed that in an approach like Visma Engage, and then offer it in multiple languages, including the Nordic languages, so that we can reveal what is most important to the people by using this very advanced language processing technology. And we do see extraordinary results from it. Both those actions in the previous example are born out of the ability to understand what people are saying using a technology which is almost like a superpower, that you can listen to everybody at the same time and understand the meaning of their words and translate that into empirical data, which you can then share with your executive team or your managers or the employees at large.
There'll be a follow-up question here, as we have participants coming from Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. Is that, of course, it also supports national languages, I assume then?
It does. We are currently supporting 27 languages, which give us a really good level of global coverage. There are some more obscure languages which we don't support, but some of our clients are truly global. Even very exotic languages such as Korean, which don't use the same kind of Roman numeric alphabets that we have in common across the Nordics and the English language use here in the UK. So part of that huge investment to make the best language technology is to respect the fact that many organizations, even smaller organizations, can have global workforces. So we have to be able to listen to people, even if they talk in their own tongue, which is different from my mother tongue, which is English.
Maybe we should have a peek at the tool as well. If you could give us a short demo, that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll give you a whirlwind tour. I think we've got the ability for me to share my screen. So here we go. I always get incredibly nervous in this moment. All right. I wonder whether you can now see my screen out there. Brilliant. Okay. All right. So I have here the landing page for Qlearsite and Visma Engage in particular. What I'm doing is going to step through some of the key parts of the platform. So we've got survey management. Let's start there. This is how we send out surveys. And what we can do is just very briefly show you what it looks like. Oh, first key feature, because I have been away from the platform for a while, it has logged me out. This is really important. I just had it open in the background. There's a lot of sensitive information, which is cool. So I'm just logging back in using my secure credentials. And in this particular case, we're using single sign-on, which we can configure for all companies, including your own unique security software. But what is really important is that when a session is dormant, in other words, that I'm not doing anything, that the integrity of the data that's within this platform is always protected. So I was signed out automatically there. So if I click again on survey management, I can just give you a brief understanding of what it looks like to send out a survey. Can you see the screen updating out there, or are you still on signed out?
Absolutely, still see the screen.
Okay, great, sorry. Cool. So this is a survey, and we've got some different statements here that we put at the start of the survey. We talked about having a great narrative, and here we've got some questions coming up next. I can add some new questions. There's lots of different types of questions. I can do a simple select many question. I can add this in. Is this a great survey? And put some options within it. I can make the question mandatory. Yes, no, I can reverse the order of those. Maybe I got that wrong, and so on and so forth. So it's incredibly simple to add some questions, but also easy to manage the languages that the survey is offered. to change the branding and color scheme. So we could adjust what the buttons look like or the text in the background. There's lots of cool choices to make this an authentic survey to your organization. And when I'm happy with the branding of it, I can preview it, both on what it would look like in the desktop, a nice clean landing screen, or on a mobile platform. And we can go to the survey and test it out. Here's that privacy statement we just saw. We can click next, some nice explanation about what we're about to see, and then we're into some questions themselves. And you'll notice that all of these questions have got full accessibility options on it. So all of our surveys are inclusive. Once I've checked the format of my survey, I can share it. I can either do that confidentially by email or a combination of email and text message, or anonymously, so to protect everybody's end identity, same sort of options, or I could send it out manually by generating a link or a code. What am I trying to show you? That actually there's lots of ways to send and distribute out your surveys with some great communications and branding, but this sort of stuff is what we would expect. We also have a library, so you can either create a custom survey of your own design, or use one of our templates, which has lots of best practice questions around engagement or inclusion or hybrid working, all of the hot topics that you might be experiencing as an organization. So incredibly quick and simple to send out a survey. Once we have done that, we hopefully get good response rates, and we can see some really cool tools in Qlearsite to help you manage those response rates, to help you improve response rate certain teams. But you'll want to ultimately be able to produce a dashboard. So we generate dashboards which have, again, nice, clean, simple looks. On the left-hand side, I can see different teams are represented. So I can navigate up and down those teams in order to see different scores. The overall team scores there, I can compare it against the previous survey. On the right-hand side, response rates, some quick breakdowns, and then further down, I can see that there are the questions themselves. And I can filter those questions to see, okay, maybe I would like to see where I can be better. So I'll have a look at where there are opportunities to improve. There's a few areas here, that's good. I can see the detail of the answers underneath and the overall score. So I scored 61% on whether skills and expertise are fairly respected. I can also look at what I'm great at and see that I've got some very positive scores around purpose and values. Brilliant. And I can also look at what the big driver questions are, so the questions that are most correlated to engagement. Every survey needs to have some actions behind it to improve things. Here I can see some actions that have been suggested, and then I can mark whether I'm going to undertake that action, and we can track completion of it. So a nice, simple dashboard, which has got lots of interesting ways for us to interact both with the scores and also to understand what are the actions we could take. And we don't just look at scores for questions which are closed questions like strongly agree, strongly disagree. Here's all of that rich text commentary. So what can you tell us about the answer you just gave us? Or for example, here's a great question. Can you think of a change, small or large, that would make this organization a better place to work? So we have here rewards, collaboration, decision-making, lots of interesting themes for this team to explore. And when I'm happy with it, I could export this to PDF. So every manager gets a fully layered dashboard full of insights, actions and ideas about what to do better. But the last thing I'll show you very, very briefly, there's lots more in here, including ways to generate reports. But what I'd like to do very briefly is touch on how the language analysis works, because I said that was a unique aspect. So in this, our analysis tool, which is used by project teams, we could look at a simple question. So we saw that this question, my knowledge, skills, and expertise are respected, was a low score for that team. Here I can see it's a higher score. This is a very traditional view of it. I can look at it in terms of absolute value or percentages. So I can see what percentages were given different scores. I can change the look and feel of text, of the chart, and I can apply some filters, of course. So in this case, we've got some demographic filters, and we've also got some filters by team. So I can select one or many, see what my selections are, and when I'm happy with those selections, I could then analyze the question itself, or I could add more filters to it. Or select a completely different question, such as this one, hit analyze. I can cut and slice the data in a traditional way. But what is unique is that we can apply that same level of functionality and insight to a text-based question. So here we had, can you think of a change, small or large, that make the company fairer? I can analyze that at a top level and see how many people spoke about different things. So the top answers here around experience or rewards. I can click into that, detailed answers, and I can see that there's lots of different thoughts here about fair work schemes, pay. I can search for specific types of comments within that in order to just highlight those that have specific keywords within it, or I can reorder these comments by how positive they are, so on and so forth. And once I've done that and I like the view, I could then export that view and share it with my colleagues. What I think is really very interesting is the ability to start to filter in the same way we did before. So I could do that quite simply at the top level. I could say, okay, I think the theme of rewards might have more comments around women at work or those who identify as female. I can see it's still the second highest theme. I could do a comparison analysis and say, okay, I'm going to look at a new filter, whereas I'll keep my main focus on women at work, and I'll compare their answers to those who identify as male at work for the same question. And once I'm happy with that, I can then analyze the results, and I can see that actually, whilst it looks like rewards is a very big issue for people who identify as women at work, decision making is even higher. So what it's showing is that 4.8% more women talk about decision making than men. And then I can go into the answers again, and I can see that actually for potentially some complex reasons, that the best way to improve the engagement scores of women based on their own identification of the issues is to then make an improvement on decision making. How's that done? Through our powerful text analytics tool, which has picked up some very specific themes there. And here are the back end of those themes. And you can then edit those themes and add your own unique language of your organization to then take power and control of text analytics to improve your engagement. And that really is a whirlwind tour, Atle. I've tried to give you some highlights. There's lots more in there. I haven't touched on how we ingest data, or the easy way to manage users, or the results center where we can print out reports and executive leadership reports. But I think there's a lot of depth in the platform, but what I hope we've seen there is it's very simple and easy to send out a lovely branded survey, either from template or to design your own. You've got a nice clean dashboard to share the results with good actions within it, but most importantly of all, a really powerful AI that can measure language in ways that we would simply never have been able to do before. And it represents years of our research, but a really cool tool for everybody to then use to drive their engagement, to find unique actions that are relevant to the context of their business, such as we've discussed in the previous answers.
Yeah, and just to kind of bring my perspective on this as well, kind of in addition to being a really, really great tool in terms of the capabilities, it's still very easy to use, kind of surprisingly so. It's getting up and running and using the kind of predefined good questions in there makes it so easy to just get started from the first day, really. But and on that note, and kind of being time aware, I would like to wrap up our discussion today. We've learned a lot what employee engagement really is and how important it is to all types of organizations, both public and private, in order to create value in what we do. We reflected on the way of doing employee surveying, the do's and don'ts, and we got a brief overview of Visma Engage. There's definitely so much more to learn in that platform, but right now I think that was what we had the time for. But most importantly, though, we've learned that giving employees ice cream every Friday is great for the short-term happiness, doesn't really help us, Peter, with employee engagement in the long run. So thank you very much, Peter Clark, for sharing your perspective on this topic. And if you listened in and thought that employee engagement is an area for improvement in your organization as well, how can I get started? We will help you in this regard and send you an email right afterwards where you can book in a more in-depth demonstration, and we can see together how we can make this work also inside your organization. With that said, I wish you all a fantastic and engaged Thursday.
Thanks so much for having me, Ale. I enjoyed the conversation, and yeah, have a great engaged Thursday. Oh, is it Thursday? No.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Did you know that about 1/3 of your life is spent at work? We want to see you make the most of it and experience a sense of purpose every workday. We want to help you match with the best employer for you and enable a delightful onboarding to your future workplace where continuous coaching and feedback is the norm. We want to see you design and lead your own career path, enabling you to develop, learn, and work as you envision. Visma Talent Solutions is your people technology partner through every step of your employee journey. Visit our webpage to learn more.